He never raised his voice. He never laid a hand on anyone. But 5 prison guards fell for him, and one of them ended up dead. This isn't just a story about manipulation. It's about how charm, if left unchecked, can kill. And it all started with a man named Dorian Lake inside West Elm Correctional. At first glance, West Elm Correctional Facility didn't look like the kind of place where secrets could thrive. Perched on the edge of Louisiana's pine forest, surrounded by barbed wire and silence, the prison was built for control. Every camera, every gate, every locked cell meant to keep chaos out. But what the system didn't account for was Dorian Lake. He wasn't like the others. Not in the way he moved. Not in the way he smiled. Most inmates came in angry, broken, or dangerous. Dorian arrived like a man who'd been here before. Like someone who already understood how power worked behind bars. And that made people uneasy. He was 33 years old, African-American, tall, athletic, his frame carved from years of working out, his face too handsome for a man in orange. A former personal trainer turned white-collar scam artist, Dorian had built a fitness empire through shady investments and online manipulation. By the time the FBI caught him, he'd stolen over $3.7 million from clients who never saw it coming. But it wasn't the money that made him dangerous. It was his gift with people. He could talk the devil into praying. That's how one former guard described him. He never raised his voice, never made threats. But somehow he got things, extra pillows, double rations, a radio in his cell. Even inmates who didn't like him respected him. Most prison psychologists chalked it up to charisma, but the older guards knew better. Dorian Lake was a manipulator, a patient, careful, master-level player. And he just arrived in a place filled with women who were lonely, overworked, and desperate to be seen. West Elm was understaffed, overrun, and poorly managed. Nearly half the guard force was female, many of them single mothers or working double shifts just to pay rent. Morale was low. Surveillance was spotty. Paperwork got lost. And in the middle of all that, Dorian waited and watched. He took note of who brought him meals, who lingered when he spoke, who looked away when their hands brushed. He memorized schedules, insecurities, weaknesses. He wasn't rushing. He was planting seeds. And the first one to grow was Sergeant Monique Harris. She was 45, widowed, and in charge of Dorian's housing block. Tough on the outside, but carrying a quiet grief she never spoke about. Dorian picked up on it immediately. Before Dorian ever said a word to Sergeant Monique Harris, he had already read her. She walked with a limp, barely noticeable, but it was there. Her shoulder carried a stiffness that didn't come from the job. And in her eyes, there was that look. The look of someone who used to laugh often, but forgot how. 6 years ago, Monique's husband, Calvin, was killed by a drunk driver just 2 miles from their home in Shreveport. He called her 10 minutes before the crash to ask if she wanted anything from the corner store. She said no. That was the last thing she ever said to him. They'd been married 18 years. She never remarried, never really dated again. She had a teenage son, Reggie, who spiraled after his father's death. Dropped out of school, got caught with pills, wound up in a juvenile facility for assaulting a teacher. Monique never talked about it at work. She just kept showing up, double shifts, head down. West Elm was her escape. Structure, rules, locked gates, and clean uniforms. She couldn't fix Reggie, couldn't bring Calvin back, but she could enforce order. And for a while, that was enough. Until Dorian Lake arrived. He didn't leer at her like some inmates did. He didn't act slick or flirtatious. He looked at her like she was a person, not a badge. And for someone who had spent 6 years being invisible, that was dangerous. The first time she really noticed him was during a lockdown drill. He stood in the corner of his cell, calm, hands behind his back, while other inmates grumbled and cursed. When she walked by, he said softly, "You don't have to carry it all alone." She didn't respond, but something inside her cracked. She started lingering a second longer at his cell door, started checking the logbook herself instead of sending another officer. She found herself thinking about his voice when she was cooking dinner, found herself wondering what book he was reading that week. Monique wasn't naive. She'd seen manipulation before. She trained junior guards on how to spot it. But Dorian didn't push. He didn't ask for favors. He simply existed, calm, present, noticing, and that made him more dangerous than any man with a plan. One night, she opened her purse and saw a protein bar, one her late husband used to eat after the gym. She paused, then walked back to Dorian's cell and slid it through the bars without a word. She didn't know why. She just did. That night, when she got home, she didn't sleep. She sat on the couch, holding her wedding ring in her hand. And for the first time in 6 years, she cried without knowing exactly why. "You remind me of someone," he told her one night during cell inspections. "Someone who used to believe in people." Monique didn't say a word. But the next day, she brought him an extra tray of food. Over the next 2 months, things started shifting. Dorian requested transfers to help with cleaning the infirmary. He started volunteering for extra duties, laundry, kitchen, even maintenance. He always behaved, always helpful, never complained, and that gave him access. Access to Officer Tanya Brooks, 28, naive and too eager to prove herself. Access to Officer Linda Cooper, 38, soft-spoken with trembling hands. Access to Lieutenant Carla Watson, 41, cold and ambitious, but deeply curious. Access to Officer Jade Reynolds, 30, married, but emotionally detached. 5 women, 5 stories, 5 open doors. They didn't know it yet, but they were all being played, and one of them wouldn't live long enough to realize it. It started with glances, not touches, not words. Just glances, the kind that linger too long, the kind that ask questions nobody dares say out loud. Sergeant Monique Harris was the first. She didn't mean to look at Dorian that way, but it had been 6 years since her husband died in a car wreck. 6 years since anyone had looked at her like she mattered. Dorian noticed her tired eyes, the way she rubbed her shoulder from an old injury, the way her voice softened when she was alone with him. "You take care of everyone else," he said once, low and smooth. "Who takes care of you?" She didn't answer. But that night, she slipped him a protein bar from her purse. It was small, stupid maybe, but it was a crack in the wall, and that's all Dorian needed. He didn't chase anyone. He let them come to him. Officer Tanya Brooks was next, 28, barely a year on the job. Sweet, shy, and deeply insecure, always triple-checking her uniform, her hair, her posture. She caught Dorian doing pull-ups in the yard one afternoon. His shirt clung to his chest, sweat dripping, eyes focused. He caught her watching and smiled. Not cocky, not vulgar, just personal. She blushed and looked away. The next week, Dorian offered to mop the cafeteria. Tanya approved it. The week after that, she approved his request to help sort mail. By the 3rd week, she was bringing him small talk and Skittles. "They remind me of when things were simpler," she whispered once, eyes darting. "Before life got so hard." By now, Dorian had learned the rhythm of the place. He knew when the cameras didn't work. He knew which guards didn't talk to each other. He knew how to make each woman feel like she was the only one. Officer Linda Cooper was different. Older, nervous, eyes like someone who'd seen too much and never fully healed. She didn't smile much, but Dorian didn't try to make her laugh. He made her feel safe. When another inmate cursed her out one morning, Dorian stepped between them and said, "Not her. You don't talk to her like that." Linda wrote him up officially. But a week later, she brought him coffee from a break room, still warm. The real problem was Lieutenant Carla Watson. She wasn't weak. She wasn't lonely. She was smart, and she watched everything. Carla was 41, divorced, and in charge of internal oversight. She wore her badge like a shield and made no apologies for how hard she was on her staff. But that didn't make her immune. What drew her in wasn't Dorian's charm. It was his discipline. No infractions. No drama. Always reading. Always exercising. Always calm. "You're not like the others," she said during a random cell inspection. "You don't act like you belong here." Dorian locked eyes with her. "That's because I don't." Something shifted. She didn't report him, and she didn't stop visiting his unit. By month 5, all 5 women were involved, emotionally, physically, or psychologically. No one said it out loud, but they all knew something wasn't right. The signs were small. Jade Reynolds clocked out late every other night, always after Dorian's unit lockdown. Tanya started skipping shift briefings to hang around the supply closet. Monique requested Dorian be moved to her corridor for safety reasons. Carla extended his library time as a reward for good behavior. Linda kept burning her own lunches because she'd spend hours outside Dorian's cell talking through the bars. They each thought they were special. They each thought they were the only one. But someone was watching. And soon, the lies would start to bleed. It was a plain envelope. No name. No return address. Just a single folded note slipped under Lieutenant Carla Watson's office door. She opened it casually at first, thinking it was another inmate complaint or paperwork from admin. But the moment her eyes hit the words, her fingers froze. "He's sleeping with all of them. Monique, Jade, Tanya, Linda, you're not special. He's playing you too. No signature. No fingerprints. No one saw who delivered it." But Carla didn't need proof. She already knew. The truth had been gnawing at her for weeks. She'd noticed the pattern. Monique defending him too quickly. Tanya lingering by his cell for no reason. Jade slipping him extra snacks like it meant nothing. Linda acting even more jittery than usual. And Dorian? Calm, smiling, always 2 steps ahead. Lieutenant Carla Watson didn't believe in weakness. Not anymore. 15 years earlier, she'd served on a joint task force in Jackson, Mississippi, investigating inmate trafficking rings. She'd built her career being relentless, by the book, and fearless in a room full of men. Back then, she believed justice was a matter of discipline. Hard work, sharp instincts, and zero tolerance for emotion. Then came the betrayal. His name was Mark Givens, an investigator she trained, mentored, trusted. He was sharp, respectful, full of promise, until it came out he was leaking internal documents to an outside gang for kickbacks. Carla took it personally. She had vouched for him in front of the warden, called him one of the good ones. He got 13 years in federal prison. She got promoted and built a wall. Since then, Carla lived alone. No partners, no pets. Her condo had white walls, 1 chair, and a coffee machine that never made more than a single cup. Every morning, she ran 5 miles. Every evening, she read court transcripts like other people read novels. She didn't drink, didn't date, didn't believe in second chances. That's why West Elm was perfect. She didn't need to trust anyone, just enforce rules. So when Dorian Lake arrived, she was prepared. She read his intake file 3 times. Fraud, manipulation, fitness empire, seduction of clients. A charming sociopath, no doubt. He was a type, attractive, strategic, dangerous when underestimated. Carla made a note. Monitor closely. No privileges. Minimal staff interaction. And yet, the first time she spoke to him in person, something shifted. He wasn't theatrical. He wasn't arrogant. He was composed, almost disarmingly calm. She expected attitude, resistance. But Dorian simply looked her in the eyes and asked, "Do you believe everyone in here belongs here?" She didn't answer, but that question lingered in her mind for days. He didn't chase her attention, and that made her curious. Other inmates either feared her or tried to butter her up. Dorian did neither. He stayed out of trouble, read constantly, and made no demands. He operated like someone who knew the rules and how to outlive them. Carla's respect for structure had always kept her safe. But structure can't defend against curiosity, especially when that curiosity comes wrapped in calm intelligence and restrained vulnerability. So one night, she lingered a little too long outside his cell, just to see what he was reading. It was The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. He looked up and said, "I always wondered if Du Bois ever got tired of explaining pain to people who'd never feel it." And Carla, for the first time in years, nodded. She didn't say a word, just kept walking. But something had already shifted. She told herself it was just intellectual engagement. But deep down, she knew better. Carla hadn't told anyone about her own late-night conversations with him. Conversations that had started with curiosity and blurred into something dangerously close to flirtation. She had always been the one in control. Until now. That night, she stayed late, long after the other guards clocked out. She pulled every shift report, every camera log, every entry and exit tied to Dorian's name. Patterns emerged. Overlaps. Missing footage. Quiet favors granted without authorization. It wasn't just suspicions anymore. It was a network, and she had to break it before it broke her. So she made a decision. Dorian Lake would be transferred to a higher security unit the following week. No goodbyes. No warnings. What she didn't know was, he already knew. The next day, Monique found out about the transfer order. She stormed into Carla's office, furious. "You didn't even talk to me about this. Why are you messing with my unit?" Carla didn't flinch. She looked her dead in the eye. "Because you're not thinking clearly. He's using you. He's using all of you." Monique turned pale, but instead of denying it, she just left without a word. The silence said more than any confession ever could. By then, the energy around Dorian had changed. He wasn't just popular. He was magnetic. Guards smiled when he passed. Inmates gave him space. Even staff who'd never spoken to him started asking about his case. But in the background, jealousy was turning into paranoia. Tanya started crying during shift. Jade accused her of spying. Linda missed work 3 days in a row. Monique showed up drunk. And Carla, she watched it all unfold like a slow, ticking bomb. "This is what happens," she muttered to herself, "when a virus gets into the system." But Carla underestimated just how deep the infection had spread. That weekend, another letter appeared. This time, it was in Linda Cooper's locker. "She's sending him away. Carla's taking him from you. Are you going to let her?" Linda sat there, staring at the note like it was written in fire. Her hands shook. Her lips moved silently. And for the first time, something in her broke. Elsewhere, Dorian stood at the mirror in his cell, straightening his sheets, combing his short hair, flexing once, like a man preparing for war. He knew exactly who had sent those letters. He didn't need knives. He didn't need violence. He just needed them to feel something. Jealousy, fear, obsession, love. And when the emotions boiled over, someone would bleed. Monday morning started like any other at West Elm Correctional. Gray skies, cold coffee, radios crackling with mundane updates. But beneath the surface, something was very, very wrong. Officer Linda Cooper never showed up to her post. Her phone was off, her apartment locked, her car still in the parking lot. She'd vanished. No call, no message, no trace. Carla didn't waste time. She called an emergency meeting with the other guards, kept her tone clipped and neutral. Until further notice, we're treating Officer Cooper's absence as a security concern. Anyone with personal interactions with inmate Dorian Lake should report directly to me. No exceptions. That statement sucked the air out of the room. Tanya looked down. Monique clenched her fists. Jade rolled her eyes, but her hands were trembling. They all knew, and now they knew that she knew. That same afternoon, Carla made her move. She walked straight to Dorian's cell, alone, and shut the door behind her. He was reading a book. James Baldwin. Calm as ever. "We're done," she said. "This little act? This performance? It's over. You're being transferred by Friday. No appeals. No second chances." Dorian didn't even blink. He just looked up slowly. "Is that what you really want, Lieutenant? Because you and I both know it was never just an act." She hated how her stomach flipped, hated that he still had that voice, that control. So she did what she hadn't done in weeks. She raised her voice. "You manipulated 5 officers. You used them like pawns. One of them is missing. Another is mentally collapsing. And you still think you're in control?" He leaned forward. "I don't think I'm in control, Carla. I know I am." She left before she said something she'd regret. But as the door slammed shut behind her, Carla knew he wasn't bluffing. That night, Tanya Brooks snapped. She cornered Jade in the hallway, screaming, accusing her of setting Dorian up, of being the reason he's leaving. "He told me everything," Tanya shouted. "You're nothing to him. Just another name on a list." Jade fired back. Within seconds, they were physically fighting, knocking over filing cabinets, and screaming until backup pulled them apart. Both were suspended on the spot. The fallout was catastrophic. 2 guard down, 1 missing, and Dorian? Still untouched. Tanya Brooks had always followed the rules. She was the kind of officer who showed up 20 minutes early, ironed her uniform twice, and carried a notebook full of emergency procedures. Her father had been a guard too, retired after 22 years at Angola. She'd grown up hearing about honor, discipline, and how inmates could smell fear like blood. So when she got the job at West Elm, Tanya wanted to make him proud. But pride didn't prepare her for Dorian Lake. It started small, always small. He complimented her professionalism, said her reports were always filed early, her tone respectful. He noticed the way she tucked her curls under her cap. Not flirtatiously, just attentively. "You remind me of someone I trusted," he said once. "Someone who saw me as more than a number." Tanya smiled, embarrassed. She told herself it didn't mean anything, but it did. He began leaving her folded notes, short, harmless things. "Hope your day isn't too heavy. Thanks for treating me like a person. Your voice is kind. That matters more than you know." She kept them in her locker. Read them at night when the loneliness crept in. Tanya didn't have many friends. She'd broken off an engagement 2 years earlier, after her fiancé cheated with someone from her church choir. Since then, it had just been her and her job. Dorian filled a void she didn't realize was still bleeding. Then came the first boundary crossed. It was after lockdown. She'd stayed behind to organize supply forms, and Dorian was still in the rec room sweeping. "Do you ever wish someone just saw you?" he asked quietly. "Not what you do, but who you are underneath." She froze. It was exactly what she wished, what she ached for. He stepped close, not touching, not inappropriate, but just near enough to feel real. "You matter, Tanya, and you deserve to feel that." That night, she cried in her car for over an hour. The first time they touched wasn't planned. It was a brushed hand during male duty, an innocent contact that lingered a beat too long. Then came late-night calls from a smuggled phone. Then soft whispers exchanged between rounds. Then, finally, one night in the staff stairwell, hidden from cameras, when Tanya let him kiss her. It felt like a secret she had to protect, like something precious and fragile. But over time, that feeling changed. Dorian became distant, less available. The notes stopped. The warmth cooled. He began talking about Carla more, asking if she ever seemed jealous. Tanya grew paranoid, insecure. She replayed every moment in her head, wondering what she did wrong. By the time Carla announced his transfer, Tanya's world had already collapsed. Her nights were sleepless, her reports sloppy. Her hands trembled during roll call. And worst of all, she still loved him, even knowing what he was, even knowing she'd been just another name on his list. That's the thing about emotional manipulation. It doesn't break you all at once. It seeps in until you're no longer sure which feelings were yours and which ones he gave you. Meanwhile, in a small break room camera no one thought was working, Dorian met with Sergeant Monique Harris. She was crying, shaking, rambling about how she didn't want him to go. "I did things for you," she whispered. "I risked my career, my life." Dorian held her hands. "I never asked you to do anything you didn't want to. But if you want to protect what we had, there's still time." Monique wiped her face. "Protect it how?" He looked into her eyes. "By making sure the person tearing us apart doesn't get the last word." Monique stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Thursday, 6:18 a.m. Lieutenant Carla Watson entered the staff shower room, as she did every morning. The prison was quiet. The hall still dark. The water steamed as she stepped into the last stall. She didn't notice the shadow behind her. Didn't hear the creak of the door staying cracked. Didn't see the gloved hand gripping a razor-sharpened toothbrush handle. Until it was too late. 6:42 a.m. The water was still running. But Carla's body was cold. Face down. Throat slit. No witnesses. No murder weapon. Just a single whisper behind the silence. She got what she deserved. By sunrise, West Elm Correctional Facility was in chaos. Sirens blared. Doors slammed. Radios barked out codes that hadn't been used in years. All units locked. No one in. No one out. Lieutenant Carla Watson dead. Murdered in the staff showers. Throat slit with surgical precision. No defensive wounds. No weapon left behind. But the blood told the story. It pooled under the tile, slipped into the drains, soaked into the fabric of a prison that had already been rotting from the inside. Within hours, the Department of Corrections sent in their own team. Internal Affairs, 2 federal investigators, a forensic analyst, and a shrink. Every inch of the prison was swept. Locker rooms, offices, cells, staff phones seized. Inmate logs reviewed. Surveillance footage pulled from 3 weeks back. But in a place like West Elm, where rules had long been bent, hidden, or ignored, the truth wasn't just buried. It had been rewritten. The focus turned to Dorian Lake almost immediately. He wasn't just connected to the victim. He was at the center of every suspicious interaction in the past 5 months. The relationships, the late-night conversations, the camera blind spots, the guard suddenly missing work, breaking protocol, or like Carla, turning up dead. But when investigators questioned him, Dorian didn't break a sweat. He sat upright, calm, polite. "I'm devastated," he said. Lieutenant Watson was a strong woman. We didn't always see eye to eye, but I respected her. I hope you find who did this. No sarcasm, no nerves, just enough grief to sound believable. Then came the discovery. A camera, one nobody knew was still functional, had captured a meeting the night before Carla's death. Dorian and Monique Harris, alone, in the old infirmary, talking softly, leaning in close, her hands shaking. No audio, but her face said enough. Tears, nods, then a whisper from Dorian as he held her wrists. It was the last time Monique was seen before Carla died. Investigators brought her in for questioning. She tried to act confused, denied everything. But when they showed her the footage, her hands started trembling. Her breath hitched. She looked like she was going to faint. "I didn't mean for her to die," Monique whispered. I wanted her to stop hurting him." "Did you kill her?" "No. I swear. I didn't touch her. I couldn't." But Linda, she was getting worse. She talked about stopping Carla. And Dorian, he said someone had to protect him. Someone had to do something before it was too late. The room fell silent. "So he told you to kill her?" "No. He didn't have to. That was all they needed. They searched Linda Cooper's apartment, found her purse hidden behind a loose wall panel, with a prison-issued glove and blood. A DNA match to Carla. Linda was arrested that night, incoherent and mumbling about how Carla was going to ruin everything and Dorian needed her. She was placed on suicide watch, charged with second-degree murder. But the biggest twist? Dorian Lake was never charged. No fingerprints, no video, no witness to place him at the scene. He hadn't laid a single finger on Carla Watson, but he had orchestrated the entire collapse of 5 women's careers, mental states, and lives. 1 missing, 2 suspended, 1 in jail, 1 on the ground. In a final report, the lead investigator wrote, "This was not a crime of passion. It was psychological warfare executed with surgical precision by an inmate who never needed to raise a weapon. He used affection like a blade, and when he was done, he walked away clean." 3 weeks later, a white transport van rolled through the gates of Red River Correctional Complex, a Level 5 Supermax facility in northern Louisiana. In the back seat, shackled, cuffed, and smirking just slightly, was Dorian Lake. No fanfare. No questions, just a quiet relocation. A paper trail buried beneath phrases like administrative reassignment and personnel safety concerns. But everyone inside West Elm knew the truth. They weren't moving Dorian for his safety. They were moving him because he destroyed the entire damn place from the inside out. The final tally: 1 woman dead, 1 woman institutionalized, 2 others suspended indefinitely, 1 still missing. And Dorian? Not a scratch. No charges. No solitary. No consequences. Just a new prison, a new number, and a brand new set of guards to watch. Or be watched. But the story didn't end at Red River. Back at West Elm, Tanya Brooks, the youngest, the most emotionally shattered, had kept silent through the whole investigation. Suspended. Humiliated, spending her days locked inside her parents' basement, refusing therapy, drowning in guilt and shame. Until one day, she got a letter. It wasn't signed, just a note written in bold black ink. "He's already doing it again. You know what he is? You're the only one left." And something inside Tanya finally snapped back into place. She packed her bag, got on a bus, and the next morning, she walked straight into the Louisiana State Bureau of Investigation headquarters. For the first time, she told everything. How it started, Dorian asking about her favorite candy, complimenting her voice, calling her T. How it escalated. Hidden notes, stolen kisses, late-night phone calls from smuggled cell phones. How he made her believe that Carla was the villain, that he was the victim. "He never told me to hurt anyone," she said. "You didn't need to. He just made you want to protect him. He made you feel like you'd be nothing without him." She turned over handwritten letters, contraband photos, even a recording she'd made of him whispering to her during a shift. It wasn't damning enough for a murder charge, but it painted a clear picture of long-term psychological manipulation and staff misconduct. The fallout reached Washington. The Department of Justice launched a full review of West Elm. Several senior officials resigned. A federal report declared the prison compromised by systemic failures, emotional vulnerabilities, and unchecked inmate influence. Monique Harris was found living in a motel outside Baton Rouge, jobless, drinking heavily, refusing all press. Jade Reynolds moved to Texas, changed her last name, and vanished into civilian life. Linda Cooper was found mentally incompetent to stand trial. She remains in a psychiatric correctional facility to this day. Carla Watson was buried with a closed casket. Her family never got closure, only questions. And Officer Tanya Brooks became the only one to speak publicly. She appeared on national TV months later. Before she ever stepped in front of a camera, Tanya Brooks stood in front of a room full of lawmakers. The Louisiana State Senate Subcommittee on Corrections had called a special hearing after the federal report on West Elm was released. The room was cold, wood-paneled, cameras tucked in every corner. Across from her sat 6 men and 2 women, some skeptical, some curious, all tired of hearing about another scandal behind bars. Tanya wore a plain blazer. No makeup, no jewelry. Her hands trembled slightly as she raised her right hand and took the oath. She didn't read from notes. She didn't bring a lawyer. She just spoke. My name is Tanya Brooks. I was a corrections officer at West Elm for 3 years. And I'm here today not to defend myself, but to admit what I allowed to happen. She paused, looked at the chairman, then at the stenographer who couldn't stop typing. I was manipulated, but I wasn't coerced. That's an important distinction. I made choices. I crossed lines. I thought I was in control, and I wasn't. One senator leaned forward. Officer Brooks, you're saying this man, Dorian Lake, never threatened you? Never pressured you? Tanya looked down, then back up. No, he didn't need to. He made me feel seen. And when you've been invisible long enough, even attention can feel like love. A hush fell over the room. Another senator, a woman in her 50s, asked softly, "At what point did you realize you weren't the only one?" Tanya swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. When I found out Carla Watson was dead. Silence again. A few members shifted uncomfortably. The press gallery scribbled faster. Then Tanya added more quietly. We talk about contraband, staffing, protocol. But what we don't talk about enough is emotional vulnerability. These jobs don't just wear out your body. They wear out your soul. And when someone like Dorian comes along, he doesn't need to break the system. He just waits for it to collapse on its own. She ended her testimony with a final plea. If you do nothing else after this hearing, do this. Mandate psychological training for every single corrections officer in this state. Not just for dealing with inmates, but for dealing with ourselves. The room didn't applaud, but it listened. And 2 months later, Louisiana became the first state in the South to implement mandatory emotional fitness certification for all prison staff, annual, state-funded, and enforced. All because one woman finally stood up and admitted the truth. A calm, pale woman in her early 30s with tired eyes and a firm voice. I wasn't a victim, she said. I was complicit, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But if one person out there hears this and realizes how deep emotional manipulation can go, even from a prison cell, then maybe something good can come from what we all let happen. She paused, then added, because he didn't kill anyone with a weapon. He did it with love. Red River Correctional Complex was different. There were no blind corners, no burnout cameras, no lonely guards hoping for connection. Here, everyone wore body cams. Inmate privileges were earned, not given. And more importantly, everyone knew who Dorian Lake was. His transfer file came with a red stamp. High risk, staff manipulation history. Level 5 isolation only. He arrived in shackles. He was strip searched twice. His cell had no windows, and his movements were watched in shifts by 3 guards at a time. But even so, Dorian smiled. He wasn't rattled. He was intrigued. New stage, he whispered to himself. New audience. And like clockwork, he began again. Polite, charming, cooperative, reading books, helping other inmates with GED tutoring, never complaining, never raising his voice. And it worked at first. Some guards relaxed. A few started to crack jokes with him. A female counselor even approved a special library rotation to reward his behavior. But it wasn't just the female staff who began to lower their guard. Ethan Monroe was 25, fresh out of training, still learning the ropes and eager to prove himself. Red River was his first assignment, and while the facility was high security, the days were mostly routine: patrol, report, repeat. He'd grown up in a rural part of Arkansas, where kids were told to keep their heads down and never talk back. Ethan had never been popular, never had the charm or swagger other boys had. But he was smart, observant, and a little too eager to be accepted. Dorian saw that immediately. He didn't flirt. He didn't compliment. He asked questions. What made you choose corrections, Monroe? You ever feel like people underestimate you? You're one of the good ones. Not every officer treats people with basic respect. It wasn't much. Just casual conversation during mealtime escort or library supervision. But to Ethan, it felt validating. Most inmates ignored him, or worse, mocked him behind his back for being young and soft-spoken. Dorian didn't, and that felt like loyalty. Soon, Ethan started slipping small allowances. Nothing major, an extra few minutes in the yard, a nonverbal nod when Dorian lingered by the bulletin board a little longer than permitted. He told himself it was harmless. That Dorian had earned it. He didn't see the pattern forming. Dorian began dropping seeds. You know, Sergeant Matthysse watches you harder than the others, right? She doesn't trust new people. She's looking for someone to blame when things go wrong. At first, Ethan brushed it off, but then he noticed the glances. The way Renee seemed to always double-check his reports. The way she never smiled at him like she did with the older guards. The doubt began to grow. Dorian never pushed. He just offered, understanding. You're better than this place, Monroe. You don't have to be a pawn. By week 6, Ethan was unlocking access doors for Dorian 5 minutes early. Once, he even allowed Dorian to swap laundry duty with another inmate without clearing it. That's when Renee Matthysse stepped in. She called Ethan into her office and asked 3 questions. Calm, direct. Why did Dorian's library time change this week? Who authorized his pod transfer on Tuesday? Why didn't you report the locker room camera glitch? Ethan stammered, sweated, denied knowing anything. The next morning, he was reassigned to cell Block Bravo. No warning, no explanation. Later that day, Dorian was pulled from all group activities, his privileges revoked. And that night, Renee added a handwritten note to his file. Attempted manipulation of male staff confirmed. Escalation strategy is non-gendered. Monitor at all levels. It was the first time Dorian miscalculated, but it wouldn't be the last. But then came Sergeant Renee Matthysse, and everything changed. Renee was 49, a former Marine, 20 years in corrections. No kids, no husband, just her job and a radar for men like him. She'd seen charm before, had stared it down in courtrooms, in prisons, even in her own family. She didn't flinch when Dorian smiled, didn't laugh at his jokes, didn't soften her voice when speaking to him. You're not special, she said the first day they met. You're not broken. You're just bored. Dorian blinked. That was new. Still, he tested the waters. Sergeant Matthysse, you seem tense. You should take time for yourself. You remind me of someone important to me. A woman who didn't let people in. I can tell you've been hurt, but you don't have to carry that forever. Each comment was met with the same expression, cold indifference. Save it for someone who didn't read your file, she said once. I know what you are. That got under his skin. But what truly unnerved Dorian came a few weeks later. He tried to manipulate a different guard, young, male, fresh out of training. Dorian planted an idea, an easy angle, just to see if he still had it. The next day, that guard was reassigned. The day after that, Dorian was pulled from group rec. And the day after that, he was summoned to a one-on-one meeting with Renee Matthysse. She closed the door, sat down, and placed a folder on the table. Inside, transcripts, surveillance reports, and behavioral logs. I don't care how good you are, she said. You won't ruin another facility on my watch. I will bury every opportunity you think you have before it even breathes. You want attention? Fine. You got mine. Dorian didn't smile this time. He didn't say anything. For the first time, he was quiet. Because this wasn't West Elm, and Renee Matthysse wasn't playing his game. She had already rewritten the rules. But deep inside his cell that night, Dorian scribbled a note on a scrap of paper. No names, just 2 words. Watch her, because even in defeat, even in Checkmate, he wasn't done yet. He never was. For months, Dorian Lake disappeared from headlines. No new victims, no new scandals, no more dead guards. To most people, that meant one thing. The system had finally contained him. At Red River Correctional, he was just another inmate in cell block Delta, reading, writing, behaving. But Sergeant Renee Matthysse wasn't fooled. She watched him like a hawk, filed weekly reports, made sure he never spoke to a staff member unsupervised. To everyone else, it looked like Dorian had lost. But Renee knew better. She knew predators like him didn't stop. They waited. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived at the Louisiana Department of Corrections. It was postmarked from a private mailbox in Florida. No fingerprints, no return name. Inside was a handwritten letter, pages long. Not from Dorian, but about him. He told me everything. He said the prison was just the beginning. That women are predictable. That if you give them a little bit of what they're missing, they'll give you everything. He called it emotional leverage. Said it's more powerful than money or sex. He's writing a book. Said he'll publish it under a fake name when he gets out. He said the next time, no one will see it coming. Because next time, he won't use words. He'll use someone else's hands. The letter was signed with a single name. Officer Delilah Knox, a junior staff member at Red River. 26. No prior history of misconduct. She was transferred out 2 weeks earlier after requesting a mental health leave. No one knew she'd ever interacted with Dorian. But now everything changed. Internal Affairs opened an emergency investigation. They pulled visitation logs, scanned surveillance, searched Delilah's quarters, retrieved her DOC-issued phone. What they found was chilling. Hidden under an app disguised as a calendar was a chain of encrypted texts between her and a contraband phone, smuggled, unregistered, and traced back to cell block Delta. Dorian's cell. The messages weren't just romantic. They were strategic. He had been grooming her for nearly 5 months, telling her stories, asking about her life, rewriting his past to look like he'd been framed, painting Renee Matthysse as the real monster. And the final message? It's almost time. She won't see it coming. You know what to do. Delilah Knox disappeared the same week. Her car was found in Mississippi, abandoned. Her phone smashed. Her bank account empty. Her apartment cleared out. She was gone. Vanished. Dorian never admitted anything. Never broke. Never acknowledged the investigation. He simply requested more books and continued his workouts, as if nothing had happened. When confronted by Renee, he just smiled. If I were you, he said, I'd start watching the men. You're too focused on the women. You think you stopped me, but all you did was move the pieces. The game never ended. As of today, Dorian Lake remains incarcerated at Red River Correctional Complex. No official charges have been brought regarding Delilah Knox. No public statements from the Department of Corrections. And no one knows where she went or if she ever left the country. But once a year, on the anniversary of Carla Watson's death, someone sends a single black rose to Renee Mathysse' office. No card, no name, just the flower. That night, after the flower arrived and the whispers died down, Dorian sat alone in his cell, unmoving for hours. There were no sounds in Delta Block except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beeping from the security monitors. The air was thick, still, the kind of silence that settles when even guilt has nothing left to say. He opened the small metal drawer under his cot and pulled out a journal. No name, no cover, just a battered stack of pages held together by tape and time. He flipped to a blank page and wrote one sentence. They only see the cage when you stop performing. Then he set the journal down, stood, and walked to the mirror bolted above his sink. He stared, not at his reflection, but through it, past the smooth skin, past the smile he'd perfected, past the man who once believed control was the highest form of power. He blinked slowly, and in that instant, something strange happened. He saw her, Carla, not in full, just a flicker, a glimmer of her eyes behind his own. The way she used to look at him when she wasn't sure whether to arrest him or believe him. In the vision, she stood behind him, her mouth slightly curved, not in judgment, not in fear, in pity. "You didn't win," she whispered. "You just made us disappear first." He spun around. Nothing, only concrete, cold and gray. Dorian clenched his fists, tried to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat. He wasn't afraid. No, not him. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in leverage, strategy, psychological momentum. But something about that mirror unsettled him. Was it guilt? Regret? No. It was the possibility that, just maybe, he hadn't destroyed them. Maybe they had changed him instead. He pressed his palms flat to the wall, forehead touching steel. Closed his eyes. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, with a small sigh, Dorian stepped back and straightened his blanket, composed himself, sat back down with perfect posture, and smiled again. But this time it didn't quite reach his eyes. And on the prison cameras, Dorian's cell light flickers. As he sits, smiling in the dark, he never used a weapon. He never raised his voice. He never had to touch anyone. All he needed was attention. Tanya Brooks, former corrections officer, now an advocate for prison reform. If this story stunned you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Would you have seen through Dorian's charm or fallen in his trap like the rest? New true crime drops daily.